Anthony and Anthony. So yeah, I'm Anthony Cronin, and I'll be speaking more to you later on today. But we've had a nice follow-up to Don's diagnostic testing and the adaptive diagnostic testing using numbers, which I will just put up here on the blackboard. Because when I see a blackboard, I just have to use it. So both Don and my colleague Anthony Brown, who we're going to hear from Ireland in a moment, are working on adaptive diagnostic testing using numbers, which is free open source software developed out of Newcastle University in the UK. Please interrupt me if I speak too fast, because I do speak too fast. I have a thick Irish accent and I'm nervous, so that's all multiplied today. But for now, I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Anthony Brown. And we've been for the last 5 years now been running diagnostic testing on a large scale with incoming first-year students. So Anthony and I used to do it years before with his mature students. That might have only been 40 or 50 students every year. They would come in August and we would give them a diagnostic test. And they loved it because, you know, the mature student is very dedicated. They want to know where they are, where they're going to struggle, how much time they're going to have to put in. But my PhD student, Claire Mullen, we started in 2020 with diagnostic testing by scale. Yeah, so about 2,000 students in the end. So I'm going to let Anthony talk about that. And if there's anything Anthony Brown doesn't say, I can maybe fill in the gaps. But we'll go over to you, Anthony, if that's okay.
Okay, that's grand. Can you see the slides?
Yes,
you can see my screen, can you?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, so thanks everyone. Unfortunately, Claire, who is sort of the person that really did this, she's sick this week with the flu, so she shared some slides on what we did. So I'll spend a little bit of time on that, and then I'll sort of explain and maybe demonstrate. I'm being very brave. I'll demonstrate what we're actually doing. Unfortunately, the library here doesn't open until 8:30, so I couldn't listen to anything that Don said. I might be repeating a lot of stuff that Don said, but I guess it's no harm that, because there are a few little niggles that you know, took me a while to sort of figure out what was going on. So Maths Fit. So it was sort of several aims. So it says at the top they're aiming to identify students in need of support, but I guess it was also to give confidence to students that also didn't need support. So the general idea was there was a refresher course, and then there was a diagnostic quiz, and depending on how the students did on that diagnostic quiz, an email was sent with various advice, and we'll have a look at this in the next slide. It was originally in 2020. Well, as Anthony said, I teach the Access course in UCD, so we usually have about 50 or 60 students, and just by accident, one of my ex-students just walked by and waved in the Math Support Centre here. And we bring them in for a workshop in the summer, and we teach sort of things like fractions and basic algebra, you know, rules of indices, things like that. And then we give them a sort of a diagnostic quiz, just to you know, determine if they will be able for the Access course. And if they're able for the Access course, they go on to the Access course, or on the other hand, we might advise them to maybe study for a year and come back again. So that was the sort of the thing we did with the Access students. And then Claire Mullen came in 2020, and it was rolled out to actually the undergraduates. So it was slightly different in that these were undergraduates and they were going to do the course, you know, no matter what. But there was still the idea of the refresher course and the diagnostic quiz, and sort of getting students ready for university maths. And in 2020, it started with over 700 business and agriculture students. So these are service teaching students. It wasn't for maths students. It was for various degrees in the university. And we started out with 700 business and agriculture students in 2020. And you can see then for the next 3 years, we did the business, agriculture, engineering, and science students. So, you know, well into the 1,000 students each time. Last year, there were new, I think the problem, if I remember correctly, it was that there were new lecturers in a couple of the courses, and they sort of wanted to feel their way into the course before they sort of committed to Maths Fit. So let's go to the next slide, and my Zoom thing is in the way. Let's move Mr. Zoom out of the way and go to the next slide. So this sort of tells the sort of the way it worked in the last 5 years. So beforehand, students were given a link, and some years. So I think originally, if I'm correct, Anthony, that it was it on Brightspace for the initial year? I know there was some problem with having it in 2 different places.
Blackboard, if you remember, we had Blackboard a few years ago.
Yeah, so I remember there was trouble with if you have sort of 2 different VLEs, it sort of students sort of get confused. So I think that was part of the problem in the original year. But for the last few years, it's all been on our Brightspace, which is our VL here at UCD. So this is sort of integrated into their module. They have a tab on their module Maths Fit, and there's an introduction video. And there is also a refresher course, which is sort of just a series of numbers exams. So that was numbers this testing, and I regard it more as a learning system rather than a testing system. So when we come on to what we're doing now, I'm regarding it much more as a learning system rather than a testing system. And I'll say something about why that is, why numbers is especially good for that. So they did this refresher course, and then at the first tutorial, so usually there will be no tutorials in the first week in UCD. So we took over the first tutorial, and we'd tell them about, what Maths Fit was all about, and we would actually start them on the diagnostic quiz in the first tutorial. Now, for a couple of years, so Claire did this survey as well. Anthony would probably be able to tell you more about the survey. I was involved more on the technical side rather than the actual, nuts and bolts of the survey. So maybe Anthony could say something about the idea of the survey and what that was all about.
Yeah. So we asked the students in their Brightspace, or the VLE at the time was called Blackboard. So we had quite a long survey where we asked students lots of demographics. Are you an international student? Are you an Irish student? Your age? And looking back on that, we've probably collected too much data. So there are ethical considerations here, and that did come up with my PhD students' transfer assessment. That people did say we collected a lot of data. Do you intend on analysing it all? And of course, with the best will in the world, we would need 10 PhD students to analyse it all. So that is something to think about. Don't ask students lots of questions if you don't intend, or you don't have the manpower or woman power to analyse it afterwards. So yeah, the survey was quite extensive. It was both pre-survey on how they did in school, and because this was 2020, the school closures was a big issue with the COVID pandemic. So we were worried around, was the curriculum covered? If so, to what extent? And students did reply that they felt that the course wasn't covered. So that was a major worry coming in. And we also asked about what grade did they get in their previous mathematics exam before coming to university. So we are different to Australia and the US in that when a student comes in to study engineering, they have to do mathematics for engineering. There's no choice. They're not placed into so mathematics for engineering course like that. There's no choice. They go into mathematics for engineering, which gets quite tough quite quickly. So if you're an international student or not used to the Irish system, it's kind of sink or swim. Back to the swimming analogy. So the survey was quite extensive. We have lots of data on it. I will present on that in the afternoon a little bit on the results, but suffice to say, we've got lots of information, both pre-survey and both pre-test and post-test. Now, we did have an anxiety scale in there, and one thing we've learned, not a good idea to give an anxiety quiz before they actually take a mathematics quiz. But I'll say more about that later on. But back to you, Anthony. I think that gives them a bit of context.
Okay, thanks very much, Anthony. So, so the quiz, it was in 3 sections, and part of the reason for the 3 sections was for the survey as well. So it was sort of split into 3 sections. And when we come on to what we're doing now, it's actually split into more sections, but it's sort of all in one rather than sort of, it's sort of more like parts of a whole rather than this was more 3 different parts. Although Brightspace did lead the students through the 3 quizzes, there were some problems because there was the way numbers is sort of embedded into Brightspace, there's arrows, you know, to click to the next question in Brightspace, but there's also arrows in numbers. So sometimes students got mixed up between which arrows in Brightspace and which arrows in numbers, and they sort of click out of the quiz rather than going to the next question. So that was one thing that we did have quite a bit of quite a bit of trouble with. So they took the 3 quizzes, and then depending on how they did, so we sort of graded it according to gold, silver, and bronze. And if a student got greater or equal to 90% in one of the 3 quizzes, they got a gold in that quiz. And similarly for silver, greater than or equal to 75 and less than 90, and they got a silver. And if they got less than 75%, they got a bronze. And then they got a automatic email generated by Brightspace, depending on how many golds, how many silvers, how many bronzes they got. And if they got all gold, they were actually, you know, congratulated and actually suggested that, you know, they might like to even get involved in a peer tutor opportunity to help students that weren't quite as good. If they got some silvers, they were advised maybe to have another go at the refresher course. And then with bronzes as well, they were advised maybe to book a session in the MSc. If it was all bronzes, they were advised to actually maybe join a study group as well. So these were all things that the email was automatically generated by Brightspace. And they actually also had another attempt. So they were given another attempt to have a go at the quiz. And they actually were given, so I didn't actually mention, so they were actually in some of the courses, lecturers were happy to give maybe 3% of the overall mark to these quizzes. So they sort of gain marks because, you know, we find that if students, even if they get a couple of marks, you know, 2 or 3 marks, it's more likely, you know, they're more likely to engage with the you know, with the refresher course and the quizzes. So they got a second go at the quizzes, and even if they only did as well, they were sort of given a little bit extra. They got an extra half mark or something just for having a second go at the quizzes, even if they got the same marks. And then there was also another survey, which Anthony, as he said, he'll talk a bit about this afternoon. But today I'm more sort of focused on well, it's more about the refresher course rather than the diagnostic testing. And again, you know, there was follow-up survey and how students did in the continuous assessment in the course compared to how they did in the quizzes. And Anthony has lots more. As I say, I wasn't directly involved in that, so actually Claire would probably be the best person to talk about that and all the analytics from that. So the last slide. So there's the you know, the sort of feedback. So it was good. Students felt it, you know, it was good for revision. And also it sort of let the students know what they were expected to know. And also it gave them, you know, it sort of introduced them to the Math Support Centre as well. So they know that the help there if they feel they need it. It was also, on the other hand, it was sort of very early in the term, and some of the stuff was actually new to the students, so it sort of caused quite a bit of stress as well. And there were also, you know, technical issues that we tried to sort out. It was actually hard the first year because it was during COVID, and there was, you know, everything was online, so it was really quite a I suppose a learning experience for us as well. So as sort of what we thought, we did try various different things. So I think in the first year, I think, you know, there was plenty of money available, and I'm not sure, Anthony, I think you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong there. So the college agreed to pay for Bolster Academy. Is that correct, Anthony? So when COVID was on?
No, the actual company gave it to us.
Ah, the company gave it as a sort of a introduction. Sorry, I got that wrong.
Yeah.
But I think if it going forward, it would actually cost quite a bit of money, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really something that you know, it's you don't really want to put a huge amount of effort into it if it's something that would be, you know, it would be sort of in a sense it would be work, you know, wasted in a way. Whereas with numbers, it's completely open source and free to use. So work you put in, it's a lot of work, but I think it's sort of something that can be used, you know, down the line for years and years. So that's why we've sort of moved to numbers. Brightspace has an inbuilt quiz, but it's not anywhere near as good as numbers. So eventually we sort of settled on numbers. Originally the Brightspace integration, it was difficult with numbers. It was more, I think, to do with because there was more than one test. It wasn't sort of just and it was also that Claire wanted to get individual marks, and there is this numbers LTI integration. So I think Don knows more about this than me, but we haven't actually got it yet at UCD. So I think if we have this LTI integration, things become a lot easier. Okay, so what we're doing now, we're thinking more. It's sort of a maths fit Mark 2, but it's much more on the learning side rather than the diagnostic side. So numbers, maybe this is where I'll sort of talk about the numbers, the new diagnosis system, and what the idea is. So maybe if I can share something else. So let me see. Yeah. So if I share this one here, now hopefully you can see that. Has everything worked?
Yep, we've got the numbers screen up.
Yep. Okay, so this is technically it's a sort of numbers exam, but it's really sort of a network style thing where a student does a particular question, and then they're brought on to another question that you determine the network. So I assume Don sorry, I couldn't listen to Don's talk earlier, but I'm assuming this is what you talked about, Don, was it?
Yeah, we talked about the knowledge map.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm actually going to say something about how we. Yeah. Yeah. So the idea is this sort of network, and so the question was really, you know, how to define our network, and we want to use this for various different courses. So the agriculture maths would not be as difficult as say the science maths, and the science maths wouldn't be as difficult. Well, the business wouldn't be as hard as science wouldn't be as hard as engineering. So we want to sort of have something, you know, that would work for all classes. So what we do is we want to sort of have a basic sort of full network, and then with discussion with the various lecturers that we might cut out bits that they don't want. So for example, integration, you know, the agriculture people mightn't want the integration in the course. So it's sort of, we want to sort of have as big a network as we can based on our leaving cert in Ireland. And then for the individual courses, we might cut, you know, particular bits out. And we are lucky in Ireland. We have, well, I don't know if that's lucky or not, but we have a sort of a government syllabus, so we know everything that so this leaving certificate. This is the exam that students take at about 18 when they're leaving school, and it gives all the various things that students need to know in quite detail. And it's sort of split into 5 strands. We didn't concentrate on stats and probability at all. That's sort of for another day. But we concentrated on the other 4 strands. Didn't really work for us. So what we did, we had all this, you know, syllabus. How are we going to decide what questions to use? And we went really old school. So what we actually did we got 4 big bits of paper and sellotape them into one huge bit of paper, and we just sort of brainstormed what we wanted. And I don't know if you can see that. Maybe if I just zoom in a little bit more. So we sort of eventually we settled on the pink bits are the sort of areas of the question. So we have arithmetic, we have complex numbers, logs and indices, coordinate geometry, we have functions, trigonometry, algebra, differentiation and integration. And we sort of just move things around on a bit of paper until we were sort of happy with what we had. So you can do all this on a computer, but just I don't know. Somehow I felt it was we did better work just being able to look at everything on the table. So once we had that sort of basic network, we moved into numbers. And this is sort of where we are at the moment. We've got what are called here learning objectives. These are our arithmetic, coordinate geometry, all the learning objectives we have. And within each learning objective, we have various topics. And within the topics, so some of the topics might only have 1 question, some topics might have 2 or 3 questions. So you just click in and into the topics, and also the topics you have what it depends on and what it leads to. Okay, and this is all programmed by you. And perhaps Don also told you about Gephi. Did Don tell you about Gephi?
Oh, I haven't mentioned that.
Yeah, so Gephi is sort of, it's like the modern version of the old school big piece of paper. So it's actually a graph theoretic program. And what you do is you sort of add nodes, which are our topics, and you can have a learning outcome, which are our learning objectives. And so you sort of have algebra and arithmetic and complex numbers, and you add your nodes and you add the edges between the nodes. And the idea is that when you run numbers, the student will be brought through the network until they sort of, they can, until they're sort of covered all the things that they need. And as you see, we've got quite a lot of, there's quite a lot of nodes. I can't see whether, I think it's about 80 something. We have about 83 nodes there. So it's quite a big network. As I say, not all courses will want all of it. So, it'll be cut down depending on discussions with the lecturers. And also the thing is, it gives a nice network diagram. And this is one thing that took me ages to figure out how to move the network diagram. It's one of those little things that if you don't know, it's hard to find, and if you do know, it's easy. It's one of those things you have to actually click both mouse buttons and drag. So it took me ages to figure out how to do that. As you see there, we have 84 nodes and 90 edges. We need a few more. We need a few more edges. We've actually got a disconnected graph at the moment. So this is something I've just put together in the last couple of weeks, and Claire's been away, so we have to discuss. There's a few more edges we have to add. And you also have this nice preview, which actually gives you a nice network diagram, and you can sort of, you can drag these things around. As I say, it needs a bit more work, but it's a sort of thing. Once you have the basic network, it's sort of nice to, you can change things around a little bit. So it's a rather nice program. And everything today is the numbers is free. This is free, so you don't have to look for funding or anything like that. Okay, so we've got our network, and each color is different. So this is coordinate geometry, and we have arithmetic and complex numbers. You can sort of see, if I zoom out, you can sort of see the whole structure of the network. Now, so what have I got? What time is it? So I've got about another 10 minutes, is it? Or
Yeah.
so what I might actually do is actually show. I'm being very brave now because this is where it could all go horribly wrong. But I'm going to actually show an example of how this things work, because we have got a sort of a minimal working model, and it runs under this diagnostic algorithm, and there are sort of two basic ones. There's the one called diagnosis, and that's for a diagnostic test. And the way the diagnostic test works is it sort of starts in the center of the graph. And if a student gets a question right there, it sort of assumes that everything before that they can do. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. And in any case, we were more interested in a learning experience rather than a diagnostic experience. So there is this other algorithm called mastery, and that was actually a bit too far the other way. And the problem was it wanted the students to do every question, and it wouldn't let them proceed if they got a particular question wrong, so they could get stuck. But luckily, there is this custom option where you can adapt the algorithm. And actually, Christian Lawson Perfect, who's the head guy that does all this stuff, he actually helped us and changed a little bit of something so that students didn't get stuck. So maybe let's just let's see. Let's go back to diagnostics. So we have a working version here. And what happens is run. So you can either embed the exam into whatever your VLE is. So it certainly works fine with Brightspace. I know there have been issues with Blackboard. I'm not sure if they have been sorted out yet. I know probably Don could say more about that. I know there were issues.
Blackboard works with the LTI, but not otherwise.
Yeah, so I remember there was some issues with Blackboard, and you would sort of have to test whatever your VLE is. But you can also just run, and this sort of runs on a server from Newcastle University. And you wouldn't get marks in this sense, but the students can still use it. And you're started at the sort of the most basic. Here we started with fractions. You start with the most basic ones. And the really good thing about numbers is it's got a lot of randomization. And the idea is that, okay, here's one question. And you can put as many, you can write these questions so that students have to show their working and whatever. And the thing is that if you notice the numbers there, 2/53, try another question like this one. The question will be similar, but it will have different numbers. So students can keep practicing and practicing and practicing until they feel confident. So they get a similar question with the numbers randomized, and you have very strong control over the randomization. Also really important is when you click reveal answers, so some of the questions here, obviously there's not much feedback, but some of the questions there's a lot of feedback. And when we were looking for questions, so there are a lot of questions available, you don't have to write all your own. The thing we really looked for was this feedback. So I mean, in some of the questions, you would maybe have a couple of pages of, a couple of screens full of feedback so that students can learn, exactly what's going on. So that was the real thing that we sort of looked at. It wasn't really the question, it was more the feedback to the question was the really important thing. And this is the thing, so you can do move to the next question. So with the ordinary mastery algorithm, this thing doesn't come up, this make a choice doesn't come up. You could just have to move on to the next question, which in this case is divide two fractions. And if you want to move to the next question, percentages, and then move to the next question, you go back to where you started. So you sort of get stuck if you can't sort of complete a question, you get stuck. But Christian did this. He sort of slightly altered it so that when you do that, you can also, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. That was the wrong one. I meant to click move to the next question. You can actually skip this question. And then if you go on, if you keep skipping, you don't have to do the question. So we didn't want students to actually get stuck. And if I skip this question again, now you see we go on to the next topic, finding logs. So sort of they can do everything if they want to, but we don't want them to actually get completely jammed on a particular question. And also you can set this up so that students can pause. So they can pause and come back to it later on. So that's sort of the working version. Our diagnostic, the one that we've sort of made most progress on is this one here. So we've got all the topics programmed. So if you go into the diagnostic and the learning objectives, we've got all the learning objectives, and under all the learning objectives, we've got all the topics, and we also have where all the topics lead to and come from. We also have questions for most of these. So if we go into there, we actually have questions for most of these. So if for example, if I click into coordinate geometry, we see we have all. So some of those, if I click in, there will be one question. Sometimes we'll have multiple questions. So here, so we actually have 6 questions in this topic. So it depends, it depends on what we have. We still have a few things to do. So we also have our problem. So we actually have a document with what are problems. So there's some questions we couldn't find that we have to write, and this is what we're doing now. Some questions there were slight problems with them. For example, so for complex numbers, we always wanted complex roots in a quadratic equation, just little things. Also, some questions needed their feedback. And for example, there was one that was German. The feedback is great, but it's written in German, so I'll have to sort of put it through Google or something and change it like that. So we've still got a few things to do. And we've still got a few questions to write, but we feel we're well on the way. Hopefully the students will like it. So that's something to be seen. And also we feel it doesn't have to be just students coming into university either. It could be developed for a second year student. A student taking second year course, the lecturer might say, okay, this is the stuff that I want them to be proficient in. And we could write an exam for the students coming into particular courses. So it's not just for students coming into first year. It could be rolled out to more advanced students as well. So I think that's about all I want to say. If there's any questions, I'll attempt to answer them.
Perfect. Thanks a million, Anthony. We have a question in the room here if you're able to hear it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you're having all these student attempts, and therefore you would have data. If a student got this question right, they got these other questions correct. Are you gathering that data?
So this is something that is dependent on this the LTI integration that Don was talking about. So what we're hoping, once we're doing a little bit more work, so we're hoping to have a meeting with our head of school here, and hopefully with his support we can maybe nudge UCD IT into installing this LTI integration. So that's our hope at the moment, but at the moment we haven't got that yet. So we're sort of fingers crossed at that. We're hoping that this is something that they'll. I don't think it's that big a job once you know what to do, but it's just sort of nudging them into actually doing it. So at the moment we haven't.
So in theory, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
You could then assign probabilities, right, to each of these concepts. So if a student knew something, they would have a probability of knowing something else, and then.
Yep,
could
absolutely.
that information then be used to update potentially the directions in the graph?
Oh, absolutely. That's definitely something you could do. Absolutely. That would be, that would be a brilliant thing to do.
And then allow for potentially expanding the graph, because you would have more information on fewer questions if you had more data on how the questions are connected.
Yeah, or even, if it was, maybe there was some question that didn't have an edge, maybe it was something that maybe it should have an edge because students that didn't do one bit, couldn't do another bit. So you could certainly add edges in there that was sort of, they had to do that before they did something else. So, oh no, that's definitely you can learn from it. No, absolutely.
Or some questions that maybe don't even need an edge because everyone who could do something else could do that one as well.
Yep, sure, absolutely, absolutely. You might be able to cut down or build up. Yep. So that's the ideal. So we're sort of trying to nudge our IT people into doing it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Anthony. We still have 3 minutes of Anthony's time if anyone wants to ask a question. Yeah, we have another question.
No.
Oh, no, you're good.
So it's open source, right?
Yeah, it's open source. Yeah. Yeah. All free to use. Yeah. And you can look up questions from all around the world. We look up Don's questions in Australia because they're the best.
Oh yeah, we have Don's questions in there.
Yeah. And Anthony has been teaching access courses. Yeah. So you can make a question available.
Yeah.
And then
you can publish a question.
the ones that are published tend to be,
qualified.
yeah, they tend to be tested because there is stuff on there that's complete rubbish. You know, the answers could be wrong, there could be no feedback, and that's the worst thing you could do is to send that to a student. But ones that are published, you get to know the good ones, and you can modify them, you know, maybe change the context. It might be a science question, but you can easily change it to a business commerce question. And there's dynamic stuff as well. I think Don had a really good one for nurses. So when you're injecting somebody and you want to get the milligrams or the micrograms correct and not kill the patient, you actually slide the hypodermic.
It's a graphic of a hypodermic that you adjust.
Yeah, that was
I'll
really.
show you some of those this afternoon.
Yeah.
And the people that have adapted it to other engineering courses like the first year physics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can write your own stuff. Again, I think the majority of the stuff is probably more fundamental, you know, the transition to university. There's lots and lots of questions on that, but I think there is traction for more advanced courses.
Want to get under the hood, there's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, actually, one of the things we couldn't find, we wanted to do the trapezoidal rule, and we just couldn't find anything on it. So we had to figure out how to write it. And that is one thing that doesn't seem to be many questions on summation. So there is actually a for loop that you can do summation, but I don't think anyone's found it. I think we may be the first people to find it. So there's lots more you can do. There's a lot there. So I don't want to say, I don't want to suggest that it's a huge amount of work because most of the questions are there, most of the questions have good feedback. But also sometimes you do have to be able to give the feedback. And the really important thing with the feedback is it's related to the numbers. You get the randomization and the feedback is related to the numbers. So it takes a little bit of time to sort of write the feedback nicely, but in terms of students learning, I think that's the real benefit with numbers. So some of the other systems like WebWork, or maybe people are familiar with WebWork. So they have randomization, but to me, it's not as good. So often in the Math Support Center, we get a lot of people coming in, and you'll see there's maybe 2 different randomizations of the question, and there might be 150 students in the class. So that's really not. To me, that's not good enough. So numbers is, and it's also really easy to edit the questions as well. It's you can copy not anyone's. If people allow you to copy the question, you can copy the question, and then you can adapt it however you want. So I'm a real fan of numbers, and Christian Lawson Perfect in Newcastle, he's really committed to it, and he will help out. So I hope he's not here. He'll kill me for saying that. But
and it has been running for a number of years. It's not just a flash in the pan. It's there for I think as long as I've been doing.
The randomization is not just number values. You can also randomize whole sentences or base one variable on another one and functions of variables, and then put conditions on those. So it's incredibly versatile. I'll show you a few things this afternoon. That's the gist of my talk.
And I should have said, just before we let Anthony go, I should have said the evidence base for this is really Claire's PhD, because we looked at the refresher course in detail over the thousands of students that used it. And for most topics, we gave them an option of read through a PDF, watch a video, an interactive video where you're allowed pause and try the question, or look at a numbers type question. And what did students use most of all? the numbers type questions. They wanted to get the practice. We actually thought they're going to look at the videos. They're the YouTube generation. They're going to look at the videos, pause it, write down stuff. No, and I'll show you the numbers later on. It was the interactive questions and the feedback that they engaged with far more than PDFs or even videos, watching videos. Okay, I think we're taking Alison's time again. Anthony, thank you.